Anybody else need a handout?
I think we're ready to start. It's 11 o'clock. Before we get started, I see some stickers of people that have voted, so remember to vote if you haven't already. This is the last class for Harry's Fathers and Sons, and he will tell us about Renoir today.
I'm not going to do that until
Please.
One more class.
One more class.
Kathleen, one more after this.
Oh, I'm sorry, this is fifth class. He has one more. Will you all please silence your cell phones or turn them off so that we don't have any extra noise? So, Harry?
Okay, thank you. You want to get the lights there? Yeah.
Close the
Okay.
door.
Sure.
Close the door.
Well, thank you again all for coming. And I found this one of the really most interesting, there's some next week, but of the relationship between fathers and sons. And as you'll see, there's quite a contrast between here they are sitting actually in a fairly friendly moment when Jean Renoir has come back from World War I. He was wounded fighting in World War I. And this is 1916, I think, and he's sitting with his father, who's in a wheelchair, who's not going to last much longer. His father, Auguste Pierre Renoir, is obviously one of the great artists of the, modern era, certainly. And his father was born in 1841, and he dies in 1919. So this picture is taken in 1916, so he hasn't got much longer to live. Their connection is shaped by the son, Jean's feelings of coldness from his father. His father was a very difficult parent for him, especially, as I'll try to illustrate during the class. There's sort of a creative tension between the two of them. Jean both honored and questioned his father's values through his cinema. The subjects are really quite different in most cases. Well, Pierre Auguste Renoir was renowned for his portraits, especially of women, which I'll show you some, nude women. Jean, the son, focuses on the complexities of human relationships and how they are shaped by social norms and personal desires. So there's a real conflict between the two, and there's all sorts of different ways in which they compete with each other. Okay, here's several early pictures. 1881 by the seashore. This is sort of the stereotypical Renoir picture of middle-class people off on a vacation. In this case, Elaine Victorine Charigot was a model for Renoir. She later becomes his wife, continuing to model for him, and then cares for their children when he becomes disabled. She meets him when she was 20 years old, and he's nearly 40. And that's sort of the rule for most of Renoir's models. They're obviously young, very attractive women, and he gets older and older from 40 on and still has children. But he has, I think I counted up a dozen different models during the course of his lifetime. She gives birth to their first son, Pierre, in 1885, and they married in 1890. It tells you something. And they had two other sons, Jean, born in 1894, and then Claude, born in 1901. Renoir painted this work in his studio, as he does most of his work in his studio, posing his model in a wicker chair, relying on studies that he has made on the Normandy coast to furnish these beach scenes. And there's several different ones of his wife and model, or girlfriend and model at that point. Pierre would become his oldest would become a prominent stage and film actor. Jean, who we're going to be talking more about, becomes a famous film director, author, and actor, and everything in that area. And Claude becomes a ceramic artist. Pierre has a son, Claude, who also becomes a well-known artist. Okay, country garden in Brittany, again, early days, the fall of 1886. They rent a house in Brittany where he spends his vacation with with Elaine and their 18-month-old son. The two can be seen on the bench, right here, and an identified woman exchanges greetings as she passes by over here. I just want to show you samples of his work through to see how his son is going to satirize this type of life, this nice leisurely upper class life, in which you'll see in some of these early pictures. Not to say that he doesn't do others, but these are some of the ones that illustrate the conflict with his son best. The figures are treated with considerable detail in here. This is not exactly an impressionist painting at this point. Much of the foliage and fruit are outlined precisely. The strong vertical of the tree trunk at the right and the horizontal of the roof neatly divide the picture with bands of flowers that carve out space for figures to inhabit. So it's a very carefully created portrait, getting people in. He mostly uses his family as obviously his female models, but his family does a great deal of this, or his nanny, as I'll show you as we go along here. This is the artist's family. This is in the Barnes. Many Renoirs are down in the Barnes collection, but this is one of them. His largest portrait that I was able to find, life-size figures, which you can't really tell from here, in full length. The canvas shows Renoir's wife, Aline, standing at the center with their 11-year-old son, Pierre. That's the oldest, and leaning affectionately against her right here. And right there, and here is Jean Renoir down in here, who's 2 or something, with his nanny right there. Renoir's wife wears a colorful hat and blouse. His oldest son, Pierre, holds his mother's arm, as I said. The artist's second son is a toddler in the foreground, supported by his nanny, Gabrielle Renoir, the family's nursemaid, and also one of Renoir's favorite models. The pretty girl on the right is probably just a neighbor passing by. And Dr. Barnes has purchased this from one of Renoir's sons in 1927. So it's been around here in our area for certainly a long time. This is a very famous painting. You've seen the luncheon of the boating party. Phillips Gallery in Washington. The models of the painting are friends of the artist. In the right foreground, Angeli, one of Renoir's models, turns her head toward the standing Magillot. Libby, is that right? Magillot was a journalist. She turns her head right here, over here to the journalist. The painter, Gustave, go ahead, Libby. Caillebotte sits backward in his chair facing over here, facing backwards. Wait a second. Right here, sitting backwards, stares across the table at, this is Renoir's girlfriend model right here, who coos at her, probably at her terrier, we hope. That's what it is, not more than that. So this is, these are just a few of my favorites, and I think some you'll recognize, that illustrate the life, the kind of world that Renoir is living in at this point. It's hailed as one of the great French paintings of modern times. Combines figures, still life, and landscape. There's a landscape back in there. You can see the sail of the boat right here, and the still life on the table. He combines lots of different situations. The burly son of the restaurant's owner leans against the balcony railing, surveying the scene. In the center, a former cavalry officer sits with his back to the viewer, speaking to a woman resting her elbows on the table. So he's here, right here, and that's another woman here, but famous, obviously, picture most of you are probably quite familiar with, but it's a lovely scene in the late 19th century in France.
So Harry, could I just comment?
Please, yeah.
For anyone who's familiar with grounds for sculpture, Sir Johnson has done a replica of this at Grounds for Sculpture. It's just wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Luncheon. This is another more modest painting, but the boater hat, these people have been out boating. Here's his boat, his hat right here showing he's been out boating. Renoir wants to put that in. Tells the comic taking a break from a canoe trip. By the late 19th century, boating's become a popular leisure activity for Parisians looking to escape. Lunch spots line the banks of the Seine, which winds through Paris and its suburbs. Renoir's handling of this paint is especially evident in the tabletop still life. Wine glasses indicated by quick, minimal strokes, concern for precise details, the shape of the plates, the couple's casual attire, even the man's ring, which you can see. I'm not sure as you can tell it's in there. The woman resting on her elbows. Leaving the conservatory. Again, Barnes collection. Well, turn it off. Renoir uses subtle body language to convey the flirtatious exchanges among a group of young Parisians gathered outside the music school. Well, you can see this man's hand is sort of pushing his friends towards this woman a little bit. It's sort of a subtle gesture. Maybe that didn't come out very well. Yeah, I can see his hand. The woman's holding a scroll of paper, likely a piece of sheet music. A close-packed group of men and women is gathered outside this building. Their figures set against the blank, unadorned wall. In the foreground, two young women engage in the conversation. They stand arm in arm, and the hand of the man is pushing his friend a little closer to the companion, to her companion. The front man's right hand is clasped behind him, as if he is hesitant and anxious as he steps forward to speak to the woman, while the nearer woman turns toward him as if in response to his approach. The further woman, her hands lightly clasped together, turns towards her companion as if to gauge her response to the man's overtures. And this kind of meeting, these women, at least criticisms that I've read about this, are more apt to be mistresses than wives of the men that they're talking to. It's an interesting observation. They're pretty attractive young women, but that's not the kind of woman that these men in that level would apparently marry. That was one observation I read about it. All right, La Loge, one of Renoir's most striking paintings from the 1870s, or the theater box. It's an example of the Impressionists' aim to paint modern life. No longer the preserve of just the wealthiest members of society, the theater has become established as one of the central meeting places for both upper and middle class. So here we see a fashionable looking couple in the loge of one of Paris' premier theaters. And this was a very unusual thing to paint at this point. Renoir's composition gives us a snapshot of their life. His careful staging of the figures in stereotypically gendered roles. The woman is having lowered her opera glasses to her lap over here. She's lowered her opera glasses. The man is having raised his to look at someone else across the audience. Creates an intriguing game of gazes, surely intended to provoke comment. However, several reviewers were troubled by the appearance of this couple, especially of the woman. They were concerned that she was not a respectable member of Paris society, which you can decide whether you think or not. But this was, she enjoyed being looked at by someone across the theater with their binoculars, and the man is obviously checking out some woman probably on the other side. Another scene. Renoir doesn't paint as many landscapes like this, but in 1883, Barnes collection has got it now. On a bay ringed by cliffs, fashionable young Parisians enjoy the sun and sea. This scene was inspired by the beaches of Guernsey, an island in the English Channel where Renoir spent the summer of 1883. Although loosely defined and unfinished on the right side, this is not finished over in here, the picture wasn't painted outdoors or on a Guernsey beach, but back in Renoir's Paris studio from sketches that he'd made during his stay on the Channel Island. He takes great delight in Guernsey, as he remarks in a letter to his dealer friend, Paul Durand-Ruel. There's no, quote, "There's no better sight than this mixture of women and men crowded together on these rocks. You would think you were in a landscape by Watteau rather than in real life. I will therefore have a source of real graceful subjects which I can use returning to Paris. So this is a more impressionist. He hasn't finished it. He likes the landscape, but this is his view of a beach scene, middle-class beach scene in the 1880s where he likes to sketch. Here's another one, Noirmoutier. Renoir visited Noirmoutier, another island off the coast, west coast of France. Painting depicts the Bois de la Chaise, an area on the northernmost part of the island, renowned for its picturesque vistas of sea seen through pines. Through here, the Bois was also the site of villas and chalets for aristocratic visitors. Tall trees frame the view, and the eye is led through the smaller trees and bushes to the open sea beyond. Two fashionably dressed women sit beneath one of these backgrounds of trees in here. And the sea is punctuated by white sails of recreational sailing boats. This is emphatically a landscape of recreation and leisure, which is what Renoir does in addition to painting these nude women. Renoir comments on the, quote, on the difficulty of painting this landscape. Quote, landscape is difficult. I no longer can paint myself out of doors like a street entertainer. He finds it's very difficult to do this and to recreate it back in his studio. Okay, now we're going to get into some of his women. We start here, 1867. As early as 1867, Renoir proclaimed the female nude as the dominant theme in his art. Quote, I already was in love with women before I knew how to walk. Okay. So I have to show you some, I'll be able to show you some of these nudes because this is again a characteristic. Barnes has a lot. The Clark Art Museum up in Williamstown has a lot, and there are others all over the place. The painting began as a nude study with a posed model in a studio. The model was Renoir's mistress at the time. The subject is Diana in her capacity as a huntress. She sits on a large stone with her right foot on an elevated perch. Her stretched arms lean on her bow. Below her is a deer with its neck pierced by an arrow. According to the painter, quote, the picture was considered very improper when he first does it. He turns it therefore into a mythological subject, which would make it more acceptable. Details such as the blood coming out of the deer's mouth, moss on the rock surface. It also is strongly influenced by the French painter Courbet, who I may have talked about before, and maybe I'll do it another time. So that's his first significant model that we're looking at here. Here's another one, Before the Bath. The full range of Renoir's career can be illustrated through this depiction of the female nude. In this painting, the young woman disrobes on an ordinary striped mattress, right here, without posturing of a professional model. When he exhibited this painting publicly at an auction in 1875, audiences were shocked by the naturalism. Renoir sought to preserve the individuality of his model. This is not just a classic looking model, which you'll see some others in a minute. He shows the model. Rather than depicting some dreamy Greek goddess, as had been the tradition of European painting, Renoir gives us an ordinary young French woman in her bedroom. Hair still under her arms, rumpled bedclothes in the background. It's a very naturalistic type of painting that he does different versions of this a great deal. Over the years, he has generated an extensive repertoire of female figures and poses. And he's experimenting with lots of different poses of the women in this. He assembled a configuration of bathing figures developed over the previous decade in preparation for his painting The Great Bathers, which I'm going to show you next. In this fantasy scene, 7 young women play and relax by a pool in the woods. Strokes of rainbow color define the painting's composition and move the eye around to the daylight, to the light of the inviting landscape and splash of cool water against the bather's flesh. The subject matter and the bright tones partly emulate the 18th century paintings by Boucher and Fragonard. So he's influenced by those two other paintings who are sort of part of the Romantic school of French art. Okay, this is the famous one. Painting depicts a scene of nude women bathing. In the foreground, two are seated in the water, the third is standing by the water, the others are in the background back there. And this has two different styles of painting in this, which I would like to comment on. He works on this painting for 3 years until he was really content with the composition, the way the figures all related to each other. It's my masterwork. It was my masterwork. When I finished it, I sent it to an exhibition, and what a trouncing I got. The one standing, the woman in the water standing, appears to be about to splash this woman right here. She's about to splash her with water. The woman leans back to avoid the expected splash of the water. The left side of the painting is more indebted to the classical tradition, whereas the right side of the painting portion is more consistent with Impressionism, if you can see that. Bather and a Maid, 1900. Like many of Renoir's paintings, The Bather and a Maid presents a fantasy of the female nude, in perfect harmony with nature, free from the constraints of modern life. The subject looks totally at ease with her surrounding, sitting comfortably on a soft fabric as an attendant combs her hair, her long hair. So this is one of his most important paintings. He did this as an older man, 1900. He's, if he dies, he's 90 something. He'd be, well, he's in his 60s. Doesn't seem very old to us, I guess. Cast off garments fill out the left foreground. This woman has taken off her clothes over here, heightening the contrast between the natural and the artificial, between the nude body and fussy modern attire. The two figures, are simple forms that dominate the composition. The curves of their bodies create a graceful outline against the wall of foliage, sort of like a curtain line that fills the entire background. So this is supposed to be a forest or foliage in the background, and the way beautifully blending these two figures together, I think it's a wonderful picture. After the Bath, you've seen probably both of these. The last decade of his life, because he'll die in 1919, Renoir returns to the theme of a single bather composition. It's been said that Renoir is the final representative of a tradition which runs from Rubens to Titian to Watteau. And this, of course, below is I'm sorry, two is that Titian? No, yeah. The picture is one of several that Renoir devoted to a single bather, the one on the right here, set in a leafy background, clutching towels. Amidst discarded piles of clothing, these enormous women, which they look rather large, are fully absorbed in their sensuality, unaware of the viewer's presence. Some critics reproached him, not for his prudence, but for a rather certain unseriousness that led him to spend so much time painting nudes. Why did he spend all this time? The image constitutes Renoir's paean to the eternal feminine, conceived by him as a tranquil, luscious, and compliant. So it's sort of his final statement here. Now we're going to move into another category. Children play a prominent role in Renoir's art. Father of 3 sons, and they're among his favorite models. And I'll show you some of them. He frequently portrays them alone or in the company of family maids. The child here is probably his youngest son, Claude, at about age 4, strolling with his nursemaid. The woman is a maiden model who his wife also remembers as a blonde Venus, who walks like a goddess, and here the two stroll in the woods. The child firmly grips the woman's hand and walks confidently behind, ignoring passers-by. in her intense search for more flowers. I'm sorry, the woman does. The painting communicates the intellectual and instinctual trust between a vulnerable child and a grown-up. I think that's what he wants to show there. The trust of the little child is completely, is completely trusting that the woman is not going to let her get into any trouble. This is the daughter of Paul de Renoir, who's Renoir's neighbor and art dealer, to whom he owed his initial commercial success. So Renoir, so he again uses this little girl as a model. A few details. The contemporary fashion is carefully laid out in the sensible fabric of a little girl's dress, tied together with a sash and a charming pair of boots. The setting is precise, a bourgeois apartment, not garishly opulent, with ordinary wainscoting and papered walls. It's very important as the background. Renoir presents a comfortable, well-appointed domain that denies conspicuous luxury. The demeanor of the little girl is at once shy and flirtatious. He wants to get that in. So this little girl might be 6 or 7. Okay, this is another maid, a nanny. Gabrielle was the first cousin of Elaine, his wife. When she becomes pregnant with the second child, the first was born in 1881, Elaine had Gabrielle move in with them to work as a nanny for their second son, Jean. As such, she was also used as a model for Renoir's paintings of his domestic life. Ultimately, this woman, Renoir, will become one of the central influences on Jean Renoir, the son's filmmaking career. His father's paintings often portrayed the French aristocratic class in an earnest, sentimental light. Jean Renoir's films are going to cut deeper thanks to the influence of Renoir's critical sensitivity. So she's the one that makes this, is responsible for this change. He says, Jean Renoir said, "She taught me to see the face behind the mask and the fraud behind the flourishes." He wrote in the beginning of his memoir back in the 1970s. "She taught me to detest the cliche." So he grows up with very much her influence of being a dominant aspect in his life. Here she is again with him as a baby, a young boy. As a parent, Renoir would rarely spend time with his second son, Jean, even as a baby. So you can take that for what it's worth. The actual parenting is mostly left to Gabrielle. She was only 16 when she moves into the Renoir home in Paris, and she spends years with him as they grow up. She took him to the movies, took him to puppet shows, playing with toys, strolling in the streets, on the beach, at the seaside. And this is Renoir, father Renoir, loves to paint her different colors. As you can see here, she's wearing. And the child, you can see, totally comfortable with the nanny, not so much with the father or certainly the mother. Here he is. Jean Renoir's golden hair, 1898. Renoir's son, seen here, serves as a model for his father from a young age, as with his 2 other brothers. He loves to paint the silken gold of the son's long reddish hair, then a fashion for little boys. You have to remember that. But this little boy is, he's getting to an age where he thinks maybe this isn't quite the way he wants to look. And the father insisted that it remain long until he was 7 years old, much to his embarrassment. Here he is a little older. "I was 7, says Jean. When this painting was done, I had caught a cold and could not go to school, so my father took the opportunity to use me as a model. To keep me quiet, he suggested I use a pencil and piece of paper and draw up figures of animals," which he's doing there as a 7-year-old. They rarely spent time together, with his Renoir father with his son. Whenever the father was around, he demanded to be called patron, the boss. Is that right? Papa. and Jean grew to view him more as a boarding school headmaster, which you may have your visions of different principles that you've had, but hey, this is not a flattering remark. Okay, he's getting a little older now. He poses his adolescent son now, young teenager, in a stylish outfit used by the former nobility. He dresses him up the way he never would have dressed at that point in the early 20th century. The dress was reminiscent of an antiquated princely life of leisure, equestrian dress, dog, rifle, nonchalant hand resting on his hip. The boy must have been mortified to do this. When he did permit him to get a haircut finally, he wants to depict Jean as a hunter for this painting, one of the most emotionally loaded paintings the elder Renoir has ever created. His hunting outfit was meant as a shorthand for the coming of age and his place within a larger aristocratic world. That's sort of the father's view of what he'd like to have him be like. And Jean will satirize this in one of his later movies called The Rules of the Game, which I will say something about when we get a little further into this, which is a sort of an encapsulation of the aristocracy and his father's absurdity and eventually their self-inflicted demise. There's a good deal of tension within. There's always a good deal of tension within creative families, and the emotional challenges of this are pretty obvious when you have two very creative people like this, and the son never quite gets over his father's influence. Okay, here he is, sits 16, an unhappy 16-year-old in his father's studio. The strained relationship between Renoir father and his son manifests itself in their art. Pierre Auguste paints from behind the easel. You can see this, yeah. Watching his son as though the childhood of the boy he was painting was already part of the past. He was very strict with how his son acted and looked. He forbade John, as I said, to get a haircut to cut his hair until he was 7, and he insists on all these different positions until he's 16 or 17. Forcing him to grow out his reddish hair periodically. For Jean, this was a kind of portrait that would become epitomized in the film Rules of the Game, which he will make later a perfect encapsulation of the aristocracy in his father's romanticized type life. Photo taken in 1916 by a friend, and this shows the father and the son actually beginning to get along a little bit here. The son had been wounded in the war, and he's wearing his military uniform. 1916, the father's in a wheelchair. This is the picture I showed you at the beginning. He rarely admits it exactly, but Jean has been hurt by his father's coldness towards him as a child. That's what he remembers as a child, only using him as a model. They got to know each other a little better during World War I when Jean, who was enlisted, returns home in Montmartre, having been shot, although not seriously. He was wounded in the leg. After he comes back, he becomes a ceramicist before he becomes famous as a film director. And this is just some quickly pictures of the kind of pottery he makes, which is, I don't know anything about pottery, but it looks pretty good to me here. Ceramics, likely learned from his father, brother, and family friends how to make ceramics. One little note, Albert Barnes buys 42 of Jean's pieces, including a vase, between 1919 and 1922. So these are all down in the Barnes collection somewhere, at least. Like many fathers and sons, they had a loving but complicated relationship. In 1920, the year after his father dies, Jean married his father's last model, André Madeleine Hescheling, painted by Renoir Sr. on the left. And this is the same woman a little bit later. She's a little older. She takes the stage name of Catherine Hescheling and becomes a French actress, and of course, Jean Renoir's first wife. And she appears mostly in silent films. And she was in 15 different films before retiring in her early 30s. But this is the same woman here, painted by a very elderly father here. And then when she marries the son. Jean Renoir would make a career dismantling the beliefs of his deceased father, Pierre Auguste. He satirizes the aristocracy and upends his father's saccharine, if you want to use that word, scenes of leisure in his films. They don't really ever see eye to eye, and his films would eventually prove themselves to be more compelling and existentially inquisitive than the paintings of his father. His father's paintings are lovely, but they're at a certain stage they stop. Perhaps all creativity is, as I've suggested, in some ways created from the crucible of family tensions. Perhaps it comes from the desire to define oneself in opposition to one's family while living up to his expectations. It's very complicated. Okay, now the next one. Libby, is that you? I think. Is that Peter? Peter, I'm sorry, Peter. Go ahead, Peter.
At the Musée d'Orsay in Paris.
A little louder, Peter.
At the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, and earlier at the Barnes Foundation in Philadelphia, an exhibition called Renoir, Father and Son, Painting and Cinema attempts to divine the secrets of their creative dynamic, although it mostly displays their similarities. On the surface, the father's paintings and the son's films had numerous connections. Jean shot frequently in the south of France, especially in the Cône-sur-Mer, and sometimes in Montmartre, where the elder Renoir tended to paint. Jean was also one of the first filmmakers to normalize shooting outdoors, taking after his father, who had been a pioneer of painting en plein air.
Okay, thank you. Jean Renoir frequently grapples with his father's legacy, and here he's shown filming The Elusive Corporal, which I'm not going to say anything about particularly. Towards the end of his career, the director of The Grand Illusion and The Rules of the Game, which are two of his great films, confided, quote, "I have spent my life trying to determine the extent of the influence of my father upon me." He set many of his films in his father's century, back in the early 20th or 19th century, with his lovely long dresses and long leisurely days. But he also uses his moving pictures to tell more modern stories. Renoir's films appear on lists of the greatest films of all time. The legendary French directors who followed him, Truffaut and Godard, calls him the patron, the boss, which is the same name that his father insisted that he be called. I don't know if anybody here remembers the Bandbox Theater in Germantown, but that's where I saw, which showed art films, wonderful old films, and that's where I saw the Grand Illusion, which I'll be showing you in just a minute. And it's a marvelous film. Maybe we could get it here on a Saturday night or something. It might be worth it. Okay, all right, let me take it away.
How Renoir's films show and reflect his father's influence. By examining social interactions, both father and son are keen observers of human behavior, both focused on the human figure and intimate relationships. Jean satirized the aristocracy and upended his father's saccharine scenes of leisure. Pierre Auguste Renoir's paintings, in his candid and intimate subjects, often depicted people engaged in leisure activities and social interactions. Jean's films echo this by depicting the intricate relationships and power struggles of the upper-class characters and their servants. An example of this is seen in Rules of the Game. Critics have suggested that creativity sometimes can be created in the crucible of family tensions.
Okay, thank you, Lou. Now here is a series of scenes. Just look at these for a minute. Now here is an example of the kind of vapidness, at least Jean Renoir considers, of sort of a middle class day in the country, in this case, or of a middle class situation. The name of the film is A Day in the Country, and here basically a family decides to go out for a day out paddling and sort of enjoying the weather out by the river. here's the woman right here, Sylvia Bataille and George Damour. And George makes, as he sees right here, looking at right here, this picture, looking at the two women as they approach, and they say, let's try to have fun. And so they each pair off, one with the mother and one with the daughter. And here's the way, the sort of, the Jean Renoir considers the rather trivialness of this life. And his father largely celebrates and embraces the leisurely life of the bourgeoisie. Son, Renoir, questions, parodies, and even disparages it. In A Day in the Country, there's a finely tuned repudiation of his father's values. Short story by Guy de Maupassant depicts a bourgeois family who spend a day in the countryside where a pair of boatmen seduce the mother and the daughter. The setting of a late summer afternoon is vital to the story, sort of the fleeting of the hours of the day, combined with sort of the fleeting nature of their relationship. It's just a very quick event that takes place, and a fleeting romance that unfolds in a single day, which serves as a backdrop to the characters' flirtatious escapades and moments of deep yet temporary feeling. So you might want to read the story sometime. Apparently what happened in de Maupassant's story, maybe you know this, but the woman gets married right here and goes and leads a regular middle-class life right here. And then at some point, about 25 years later, she goes back to this location. She meets her early boyfriend, and then nothing exists, totally empty. The relationship just, there's nothing there. So it's sort of a one afternoon romance, at least, and that's what he's trying to satirize here. Jean borrowed frequently from his father in themes and source materials and even in people with whom he was close. But where Renoir father largely celebrates and embraces the leisurely life of the bourgeoisie, Renoir feasts, questions, parodies, and even disparages it. In his film A Day in the Country was created one of his most finely tuned repudiations of his father's sentimental values. So you can see this playing out in some of the different examples. Here he is, there are just two different illustrations. Here he is filming this picture right here. This is swinging back and forth in there. And then here's an earlier painting of his son, which he's made him so embarrassed, right, in that picture. Okay, let's give you a quick look at this Day at the Country. I could get it here. Okay. This is him at work. Is that loud?
In 1994, on the occasion of the centenary of Jean Renoir's birth, the Cinémathèque Française released 86 minutes worth of outtakes and 15 minutes worth of screen tests for A Day in the Country.
Can you hear it?
Altogether, a total of 4.5 hours of outtakes have been preserved. This is the only Renoir film for which such material is available, and it proves to be a revelation. For the first time, because of the surviving production footage for A Day in the Country, we have evidence of how carefully Renoir planned the film and of how he worked during the shoot. The screen tests with Georges Danou, who will play Henri, and Sylvia Bataille, who will play Henriette, which were done on June 25th, 1936, 2 days before shooting began, already tell us where the film is headed. We see the two actors separately and together as Renoir tries out various angles, expressions, and postures. In the first series of tests with Bataille alone, he has her laugh. And then purse her lips in the expression she will present to Danou when their characters meet again in the film's epilogue after the passage of years. Sylvia Bataille's unforgettable performance conveys her character's trembling look of disillusionment, her quivering sense of disappointment and betrayal. The trajectory from her open expression at the beginning of the film to her closed disappointment at the end is the film's narrative arc. Shooting began on June 27, 1936. and nothing in Renoir's preparation had been left to chance. In the shooting script, dialogue has been determined, the sequences established, their location noted, the shots broken down, and shot scale specified. Sets and props have been built or gathered. The clapperboard is held by Jacques Paquer for the take which will be the film's first shot, with the boy fishing on the bridge. That boy is Renoir, Jean's 14-year-old son. For most takes, it is he whom we see holding the clapperboard, and here announcing the sequence, shot, and take number. When Anna is absent, the board is usually held by Henri Cartier-Bresson, the celebrated photographer, who was the second assistant on the film and has a bit part as the second seminarian from the right.
Okay. That gives a little snapshot of how carefully he directed this as well as the scene. Okay, photograph of Jean Renoir with one of his father's portraits up there, the young hunter right up here in the upper right-hand corner, with his second wife. As he gets older, Jean becomes more aware of how much of his self had been constructed in opposition to his father. This is an awful, terrible thing, but I have spent my life trying to determine the extent of the influence of my father upon me. I did my utmost to escape from it, to dwell upon those when my mind was filled with the precepts I thought I had gleaned from him. It seemed to slowly dawn on him that to rebel against his father was to enter into a dialogue with him. To reject something or someone is to give it power. To admit that it merits rejection of all. Quote, if certain landscapes and certain costumes bring to mind my father's painting, it's for two reasons, he wrote. First, because it takes place during the period, and second, in a place where my father worked a great deal in his youth. It's also important because it's my father. I'm my father's son. This is I think the film that I thought I liked the most of his work. It's a drama of prison camp, life and death in World War I, released in 1938 when the world is the edge of the war. The Grand Illusion was a plea to self-destructive Europe not to commit suicide again, and Europe does not listen. Director Jean Renoir was a veteran of the First World War as a cavalryman. Then he was a pilot. He based his film on conversations he had with POWs, Germans especially, and as well as French. Many of the incidents in this film come from these discussions with men who had been behind the wire, having been imprisoned during the war. The grand illusion of Renoir's life is the notion that the upper classes somehow stand above war. The German in this case cannot believe that his prisoners, whom he treats almost as guests, would try to escape. After all, they had given their word not to try to escape, which is rather okay. And here's a clip from The Grand Illusion, which I think I want to show you here. Oh, wait a minute, where is this?
Try it again.
Almost got it. Here we go.
Grand Illusion is an exceptionally brash yet warmly humanist anti-war film for being released in 1937. The film takes place during World War I, and a number of French soldiers are being held captive by the Germans in prison camps. Captain Boldieu is of elite status as a captured soldier, while Lieutenant Marchal is among the working-class prisoners. When they're captured, Boldieu is invited to the lunch of the aviator who shot him down, a man by the name of Rittmeister von Rufenstein. The two connect quite well as they're both aristocrats and have mutual acquaintances, sharing similar ranks within their following as well as social outlooks. This does not mean that Bourdieu is exempt from being a prisoner of war, however, but it does bring up an interesting connection between the two. Bourdieu and Rothenstein seem to get along with each other more than anyone else, despite both being sworn by their countries to be enemies. Both men soon form a connection with the other prisoners. This proves to be a challenge considering there's a language barrier with the British inmates and the German forces that continue to move them from various camps, leaving little time to finish escape plans. Renoir's direction is pretty astounding here. There's a moment when a man is excitedly going through items that he finds a dress and places it upon himself. We then get reactions of the crowd around him, but we don't get the traditional close-up reaction shots of the era. Instead, we get a long shot of the collected reactions, taking in all their faces at once. It's a scene that not only has faith in the viewer to read the many characters of one shot, but war is not an unfamiliar one, telling the story of how enemies connect and that nationalistic hostilities are ultimately pointless. The film touches on a lot of aspects of class, race, and politics that make war in Europe come about so easily when there is such a lack of unity. What makes the film exceptionally poignant is that only 2 years after the completion of the film, Europe was once more at war for such similar aspects. A lot of brewing elements that led to World War II are touched upon in the film, not merely the obvious commentary on war ultimately being a futile struggle that solves nothing. Class is obviously a big topic, not just for the differences in how the prisoners of certain social circles are treated, but how the connections of the aristocrats place a perspective on the futility of war. Bourdieu and Rothenstein run in similar circles. Their culture, they speak many languages, and have mutual friends. But Renoir doesn't treat these higher-class men as the cream of the crop who will be spared and prosper after the war. Quite the opposite, in fact. Renoir's portrayal of the aristocracy is that it is not only dying, but that it must die if society is to prosper past mere politics and war. It's for this reason that when Rothenstein is forced to kill Bourdieu, Bourdieu not only accepts his fate, but finds a certain glory in his demise, not merely because the prisoners of Machael and Rosenthal are able to escape the prison due to such a distraction. Renoir's film also somewhat subtly addresses anti-Semitism. For instance, look at the character of Rosenthal. He is posed as a Jewish character that is a reflection of the Rothschild banking family in France. Renoir would later confirm that the inclusion of such a character was meant to attack the anti-Jewish sentiments being pushed forth by the likes of Adolf Hitler. As with the best of such anti-war films, Renoir humanizes the struggle with a great focus on individuality. His film is loaded not just with drama and commentary, but also a lot of simple moments of comedy and camaraderie. These moments of levity are not so much present to offer up that brevity from the enormity of war, but to paint a humanist edge on the conflict. The soldiers recognize these moments of breaking from the violence and persecution as the moments that matter most. It's for this reason that Grand Illusion isn't so much about war as it is about people, and that it's individuality that makes the world so much more enticing, rather than forcing everyone into boxes, battlefields, or prison cells. In the 1950s, Renoir's film was re-released, and he described the picture as, quote, a story about human relationships. Naturally, Grand Illusion has received loads of praise, but I think the best might be from Orson Welles. When asked on the Dick Cavett Show which 2 films he would take with him on the Ark, preserving film from the end of the world, he chose Grand Illusion as one of the 2 films that he would bring with him. And if you're curious what the second film was, well, he was a bit on the spot, couldn't really think of an answer, and just said,
something else.
I don't know. Okay, and this is the last one here. So at the end of the Grand Illusion, 2 prisoners of war, from working class engineer and then this other man, a wealthy Jew, attempt an escape from a German patrol across a snowy mountainside. As you can see, they're shot at by a German patrol while crossing, but successfully cross the border into Switzerland, a fact noted by a German officer who orders his men to cease fire. Renoir believes in the division of the world along horizontal lines and not along vertical lines as expressed by his father. The sort of class is central to the work of both of these men. So that's all I've got to say, and if anybody would like to make some comments about these, want to get the lights, Kathleen? We can do that. Any reactions or comments?
I have one little thing to add, don't I always? A very interesting thing appeared in the paper, which some of you may have seen, the painting of the nanny and the son had been lost, and it has just been found.
In France or here? Or?
Oh, I don't know, it was just a little script, and, but that's hot off the press.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. That you found it. Okay. Yeah, Libby?
I have a little bit of interesting trivia to throw into our understanding of paintings in past years. There is an art supply store in Paris, the name of which I cannot remember, and it's been around for years, and it was established by a man who invented the paint tube.
The paint tube.
Which meant that artists could take the paints out into the countryside with them. They didn't have to do sketches and do it all in their studios.
Huh.
And the place is still there as far as I know, and so it's quite intriguing to learn that.
That is, yeah, very interesting. Okay.
Thank you very much. A lot of this stuff about Jean Renoir is new to me, and when we showed the initial picture of A Day in the Country, all I could think of was Stephen Sondheim with his famous A Weekend in the Country, and I don't know, does anybody know if that was a specific homage to Renoir in writing that?
I don't know, but it sounded like it
It was
could have
about,
been.
it was about Seurat, not Renoir. It was about Seurat.
Seurat?
Yeah, it was based on Seurat.
Maybe it was Seurat, okay. Well, thank you all for coming, okay.